The biggest, baddest battleship on the seas was followed closely by a cruiser, much like a little cousin that looks up to an older cousin. This cruiser, though smaller than the battleship, was by no means wimpy. She was a hungry beast on the seas, hunting Allied ships in the early parts of World War II. As the tides turned, she would run away desperately from Allied shipping. One day, she'd end up captured, and then she'd face nuclear destiny. Prinz Eugen was an Admiral Hipper-class cruiser ordered by the Nazi Kriegsmarine from the Germania Werft shipyard in Kiel, and her keel was laid down on April 23, 1936 under yard number 564. She was launched on August 2, 1938. Her commissioning was delayed as she was slightly damaged thanks to the RAF attack on Kiel on July 1, 1940. She suffered 2 relatively light hits and was commissioned on August 1st. She spent the remainder of 1940 conducting sea trials in the Baltic Sea. In April of 1941, she joined the newly commissioned battleship Bismarck for maneuvers in the Baltic. These 2 ships were both selected for Operation Crossroads, a breakout into the Atlantic to raid Allied commerce. On the way out through the Fehmarn Belt en route to Kiel, Prinz Eugen detonated a magnetic mine dropped by British aircraft. The mine damaged the fuel tank, propeller shaft couplings, and fire control equipment. The planned sortie with Bismarck was delayed as she underwent repairs, though it would resume as soon as she was ready. By May 11, 1941, Prinz Eugen was repaired and ready to go. She steamed to Gotenhofen, where her crew readied her for her Atlantic sortie. On May 18th, she rendezvoused with Bismarck off Cape Arcona. The 2 were escorted by 3 destroyers, Hans Lloydy, Z-16 Friedrich Eckholt, and Z-23, and a flotilla of minesweepers. The Luftwaffe covered the 2 in the air during the voyage out into the Atlantic. At around 1 p.m. on May 20th, the German flotilla encountered the Swedish cruiser HSWMS Gotland, which shadowed the Germans for 2 hours to Kattegat. German High Naval Command was not concerned about the security risk posed by Gotland, though Admiral Gunther Lutyens believed operational security had been lost. Codebreakers at Bletchley Park confirmed an Atlantic raid was coming, as they had decrypted reports that Bismarck and Prinz Eugen had taken on prize crews and requested additional navigational charts from headquarters. 2 planes were dispatched to search the Norwegian coast in search of the flotilla, and on the evening of May 20th, Prinz Eugen and friends reached the Norwegian coast. The minesweepers were detached, and the 2 raiders and their destroyer escorts continued north. The next morning, Prinz Eugen picked up a signal ordering British reconnaissance aircraft to search for 2 battleships and 3 destroyers heading north off the Norwegian coast. At 7 a.m. on the 21st, the Germans spotted 4 aircraft that quickly left. Shortly after 12 a.m., the flotilla reached Bergen and anchored at Grimstadfjord. While there, they painted over the Baltic camouflage with the standard outboard gray worn by German warships operating in the Atlantic. While in Bergen, Prinz Eugen refueled, but Bismarck did not, and at 7:30 p.m. on May 21st, Prinz Eugen, Bismarck, and the 3 destroyers left port. By midnight, the force was in open sea and headed to the Arctic Ocean. At 4:14 a.m. on May 22nd, the 3 escorts were detached and the pair continued on alone. The ships were then ordered out into the open Atlantic. At 4 a.m. on May 23rd, Lutyens ordered the 2 to increase speed to 27 knots to make the dash through the Denmark Strait. Upon entering the strait, the ships activated their radar detection equipment sets. Bismarck was ahead of Prinz Eugen by about 2,300 feet, with mist greatly reducing visibility. The Germans encountered some ice at about 10 a.m., which meant they needed to reduce speed to about 24 knots. 2 hours later, the 2 reached a point north of Iceland. They had to zigzag to avoid ice floes. At about 7:22 p.m., they detected the cruiser HMS Suffolk about 41,000 feet away. Prinz Eugen's radio intercept team decrypted the radio signals being sent by Suffolk and learned their location had been reported. Though Prinz Eugen was given permission to attack Suffolk, they couldn't get a clear sight of her and didn't engage. Suffolk dropped to a safe distance and followed the German ships. At 8:30 p.m., the heavy cruiser HMS Norfolk joined Suffolk, but approached the German raiders too closely. The Germans were ordered to attack, and Bismarck fired 5 salvos, 3 of which straddled Norfolk and rained shell splinters onto her decks. The cruiser laid a smokescreen and fled into a fog bank, ending the brief altercation. The concussion disabled Bismarck's radar set, and so Prinz Eugen was sent ahead of Bismarck since her radar set was operational. The two were tracked through the night. Harsh weather broke on the morning of May 24th, revealing a clear blue sky. At 5:07 that morning, hydrophone operators aboard Prinz Eugen detected a pair of unidentified vessels approaching the German formation at a range of 20 nautical miles. At 5:45, lookouts on the German ships spotted smoke on the horizon. This turned out to be HMS Hood and Prince of Wales. Lutyens ordered his ship's crews to battle stations. By 5:52 a.m., the ships were about 85,000 feet from one another and Hood opened fire, Prince of Wales joining in a minute later. Hood engaged Prince Eugen, and Prince of Wales attacked Bismarck. The British approached the Germans head-on, so they could only use their front guns, while the Germans could fire full broadside. Both German ships concentrated on HMS Hood, and after a minute of firing, Prinz Eugen scored a hit with a high-explosive shell, detonating an unrotated projectile ammunition and starting a huge fire on Hood, which was quickly extinguished. As the British ships turned to fire broadside, the Germans split fire, with Prinz Eugen firing on Prince of Wales. Within a few minutes, Prinz Eugen scored a pair of hits on the battleship and reported a small fire had started. Prinz Eugen was ordered to fall behind Bismarck, so she could continue monitoring Norfolk and Suffolk, which were about 10 to 12 nautical miles to the east. At 6 a.m., Hood was completing her second turn to port when Bismarck's fifth salvo hit her. The shell reached her rear ammunition magazine and detonated 110 long tons of cordite propellant. The massive explosion broke her back between the main mast and rear funnel. The bow traveled forward briefly before filling with water, and the bow rose at a steep angle and sank. The stern followed suit, rising upward and sinking. In just 8 minutes of battle, Hood was gone, taking all but 3 of her 1,419 crew with her. Prince of Wales did score 3 more hits on the Bismarck, but she was damaged, so the battleship withdrew. The Germans ceased fire as the range widened, though the captain of the Bismarck was hungry to sink her. Lutyens rejected this request, instead ordering the 2 ships out to open sea. Bismarck was damaged, leaking oil from this engagement. Prinz Eugen submitted a damage report at 8:01 a.m., and she was ordered to Saint-Nazaire for repairs. Shortly after 10 a.m., Prinz Eugen was ordered behind the Bismarck to see how bad the oil leak really was. After confirming, quote, broad streams of oil on both sides of Bismarck's wake, Prinz Eugen returned to forward position. The weather was getting worse, and so Lutyens tried to detach Prinz Eugen at 4:40 p.m. However, the squall wasn't heavy enough to cover her withdrawal, so she was recalled for a bit. The cruiser was successfully detached at 6:14 p.m. Bismarck turned around to face Wake Walker's cruise formation, forcing Suffolk to turn away at high speed. Prince of Wales fired 12 salvos at Bismarck, which clapped back with 9, none of which hit. The action diverted British attention and permitted Prinz Eugen to escape. On May 26th, Prinz Eugen rendezvoused with the supply ship Spitzern to refuel her nearly empty fuel tanks. She, by then, only had 160 tons of fuel left, enough for 1 day. Afterwards, she continued further south on a mission against shipping lines. Before any merchant ship was found, defects in her engines showed, and on May 27th, the day Bismarck was sunk, she was ordered to give up her mission and make for a port in occupied France. On May 28th, she refueled from the tanker SO Hamburg, and that same day more engine problems showed up, including trouble with her port engine turbine, the cooling of the middle engine, and problems with the starboard screw, reducing her maximum speed to 28 knots. Her propeller problems could only be checked and repaired in a dock, and thus Brest, with its large docks and repair facilities, was chosen. She miraculously made it to the Bay of Biscay undiscovered, and on June 1st, she was joined by German destroyers and aircraft off the coast of France south of Brest and escorted in, and she reached there late June 1st, immediately docking for repairs. If you like my content and want more cool stuff to watch, please check out our new channel, Aviation Disasters Explained. The first videos for that channel are up now. Okay crew, let's get into the rest of her service. Since Brest really isn't that far from the airfields in southern England, Prinz Eugen and the battleships Scharnhorst and Geisenau were repeatedly attacked by the Allies. The RAF jokingly called the three the Brest Bomb Target Flotilla, and between August 1st and December 31st, 1941, it dropped some 1,200 tons of bombs on the port. On the night of July 1st, 1941, Prinz Eugen was struck by an armor-piercing bomb that destroyed the control center deep down under the bridge. The attack killed 60 men and wounded 40 more. The loss of the control center also made the main guns useless, and repairs lasted until the end of the year. Due to the constant air attacks, Germany ordered the three ships to a safer base as soon as possible, and on February 11, 1942 at 11 p.m., the three left Brest. They entered the channel an hour later and joined a flotilla of torpedo boats and Luftwaffe air forces. By 1 p.m., the ships had cleared the Strait of Dover, but half an hour later, a flight of 6 Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers with Spitfire escort attacked the Germans. The Luftwaffe fought them off successfully. She came into close contact with the British off Dover, but she did arrive safely in Brunsbüttel on the morning of February 13th. She was undamaged, but one man on the ship died due to aircraft fire. On February 21st, Prinz Eugen, the heavy cruiser Admiral Scheer, and the destroyers Richard Beitzen, Paul Jacobi, Z-25, Hermann Schumann, and Friedrich Inn steamed to Norway. While patrolling Trondheim's ford 2 days later, the British submarine Trident torpedoed Prinz Eugen. The torpedo struck her stern, killing 50 men, causing serious damage, and rendering the ship unmaneuverable. However, she was able to make it to Trondheim and was then towed to Lofjord, where she was repaired over the next few months. Her entire stern was cut off and plated over, with 2 jerry-rigged rudders, operated manually by capstans, being installed. On May 16th, she returned to Germany under her own power. She was attacked by aircraft on the way to Kiel, but they failed to hit her. She was out of service once more for repairs until October, conducting sea trials starting October 27th. In early January 1943, she was ordered to return to Norway to reinforce other ships there. Twice in January, she attempted to head to Norway with Scharnhorst, but both attempts failed due to British surveillance aircraft spotting them. It became apparent that it would be impossible to move the ship to Norway, and so she was assigned to the Fleet Training Squadron. For 9 months, she cruised the Baltic training cadets. Thank you so much to our amazing YouTube members and patrons. If you'd like to have some awesome perks like episodes a full day in advance, join our YouTube memberships today. Okay, let's get into her Baltic service and her fall from grace. As the Soviet army pushed the Wehrmacht back on the Eastern Front, it became necessary to reactivate Prinz Eugen as gunnery support. On October 1st, 1943, the ship was reassigned to combat duty. In June of 1944, Prinz Eugen, the heavy cruiser Lotsa, and the 6th Destroyer Flotilla formed the 2nd Task Force, later renamed Task Force Thiel after its commander. Prinz Eugen served as the flagship. Throughout June, she steamed in the eastern Baltic northwest of the island of Uto as a show of force during the German withdrawal from Finland. On August 19th through the 20th, she steamed into the Gulf of Riga and bombarded Tukums. 4 destroyers and 2 torpedo boats supported the action, along with Prinz Eugen's float planes. The cruiser fired a total of 265 shells from her main battery. Prinz Eugen's bombardment was instrumental in the successful repulse of the Soviet attack. In early September, Prinz Eugen supported a failed attempt to seize the fortress island of Hogland, and then the ship returned to Gotenhafen before escorting a convoy of ships evacuating German soldiers from Finland. The convoy, consisting of 6 freighters, sailed on September 15th from the Gulf of Bothnia, and though Swedish aircraft and destroyers shadowed the convoy, they didn't engage. The next month, Prinz Eugen returned to gunfire support duties. After mostly uneventful work through the end of 1944, she had her worn-out gun barrels rebored, and then she was resupplied, being ready for action by mid-January of 1945. She was sent to bombard Soviet forces in Samland, and she fired 871 rounds at the Soviets advancing on the German bridgehead at Kranz, held by the 28th Corps, which was protecting Königsberg. At this point, she'd spent most of her ammo, and munitions shortages forced her to remain in port until March 10th, when she bombarded forces around Gotenhafen, Danzig, and Hella. The next month, on April 8th, Prinz Eugen and Lützow steamed to Swinemünde. On April 13th, 34 Lancaster bombers attacked the two ships in port. Thick cloud cover forced the British to abort the mission and return 2 days later. On the second attack, they succeeded in sinking Lützow with a single tallboy bomb hit. Prinz Eugen then departed Swinemünde for Copenhagen, arriving on April 20th. Once there, Prinz Eugen was decommissioned on May 7th and turned over to the Royal Navy Control the following day. During her operational career with the Kriegsmarine, Prinz Eugen lost 115 crew members. 79 men were killed in action, 33 killed in accidents, and 3 died of other causes. Of these 115 crew members, 4 were petty officers, 7 were cadets or ensigns, 2 were petty officers, 22 were junior petty officers, 78 were sailors, and 2 were civilians. On May 27, 1945, she and the light cruiser Nürnberg, the only major German naval ships to survive the war in serviceable condition, were escorted to Wilhelmshaven. On December 13th, Prinz Eugen would be given to the U.S. as a war prize, becoming USS Prinz Eugen. The U.S. didn't really want her, but they didn't want the Russians to have her even more. Her very large GHG passive sonar array was removed and installed on the submarine USS Flying Fish for testing. American interest in magnetic amplifier technology increased again after findings and investigations of the fire control system of Prinz Eugen. The guns from turret Anton were removed while in Philadelphia. The ship would then later be allocated to the fleet of target ships for Operation Crossroads in Bikini Atoll, which was meant for nuclear testing. Due to issues with her propulsion systems, she was towed to the atoll, and miraculously she survived 2 atomic bomb blasts. Test Able was an airburst on July 1, 1946, and Test Baker a submerged detonation on July 25th. She was moored about 1,200 yards from both blasts and was only lightly damaged. She literally took it like a champ and said, "Is that all you've got?" And no, it wasn't. She was now a nuclear wasteland. So she was towed to the Kwajalein Atoll, where a small leak went unrepaired due to the radiation danger. On August 29, 1946, she was decommissioned. By late December of 1946, she was in bad condition. On the 21st, she began to list heavily, and a salvage team did not make it to Kwajalein in time. The U.S. attempted to beach her, but on December 22nd, she capsized and sank. Her stern, including propeller assemblies, remains visible above the surface of the water. The U.S. government denied salvage rights on the grounds that it did not want the contaminated steel entering the market. Beginning in 1974, the U.S. government began to warn about the danger of an oil leak from the ship's fuel tanks. The government was concerned about the risk of a severe typhoon damaging the wreck and causing a leak. Starting in February 2018, the U.S. Navy, including the Navy's Mobile Diving and Salvage Unit 1, U.S. Army, and the Marshall Islands conducted a joint oil removal effort with the salvage ship USNS Salvor, which had cut holes into the ship's fuel tanks to pump the oil from the wreck directly into the oil tanker Humber. The work was done by October 15, 2018, extracting approximately 250,000 U.S. gallons of fuel oil, which amounted to 97% of the fuel remaining aboard the wreck. The rest is sealed in protected internal tanks, and remains secure. For now.